The morning sun had barely touched the little town when the smell of coffee and toasted bread filled the small restaurant on Main Street. It wasn't a fancy place, just a quiet diner where people came for their breakfast, a chat, and maybe a bit of comfort before heading off to their busy lives. Among the clinking cups and low conversations moved a young woman with a tray in her hands. She wore a simple uniform, her hair neatly tied back, and a small smile that never seemed to fade even when she was tired. Her name was Lila. To most customers, she was just the friendly waitress who refilled their coffee and remembered how they liked their eggs. But behind that calm smile was someone carrying dreams far bigger than anyone around her could imagine. Lila had always loved music. Ever since she was a little girl, she had been drawn to the piano that sat in the corner of her grandmother's house. She remembered pressing the keys gently, curious about how each one made a different sound. Over the years, she taught herself to play by ear, spending hours practicing melodies she heard on the radio. It became her escape, her peace, and her way of expressing everything she couldn't say in words. But life had other plans. When her father got sick and her family needed money, Lila gave up her dream of studying at the music academy. She took a job at the diner to help pay the bills. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. She told herself it was temporary, but days turned into months and months into years. Still, whenever she had a moment alone, she played the old piano that sat in the corner of the restaurant. It was dusty and slightly out of tune, but to her it was a friend. The other waiters teased her sometimes, saying she should have been a performer instead of serving pancakes. She would just laugh softly and say, "Maybe in another life." That morning felt like any other. The diner was half full, the regulars were in their usual spots, and the hum of conversation mixed with the sizzle of bacon from the kitchen. Lila was serving coffee when her manager called her over. "Hey, Lila," he said, wiping his hands on a towel. "We're going to be busy tonight. Some folks from that big talent competition in town are coming for dinner. Make sure the place looks good, all right?" She nodded. "Sure thing. Should I polish the piano too?" "Yeah, why not?" he chuckled. "Though I doubt anyone will play it, just make it look nice." Lila smiled faintly. She didn't know why she felt a small spark inside her when she heard that. Maybe it was because she hadn't touched that piano in weeks. Maybe it was because something about the thought of musicians and judges being in the same room stirred old memories she had tried to bury. As the sun went down, the diner transformed a little. Candles were placed on the tables, soft music played through the speakers, and the staff moved with a mix of nervousness and excitement. The judges from the local talent competition arrived one by one, men and women dressed sharply, carrying the confident air of people used to being listened to. Lila noticed one of them in particular, a tall man with silver hair and a deep voice. His name tag read, Mr. Coleman. He had the look of someone who had seen hundreds of auditions and didn't expect to be impressed anymore. He took a seat near the center table with the rest of the group. As they ordered, Lila kept her smile steady, doing her job as always. But she could feel the weight of their presence in the room. She overheard them talking about contestants, who had potential, who didn't. One of them laughed loudly, saying, "There's always that one who thinks they're special but ends up embarrassing themselves." Lila didn't mean to listen, but the words made her heart squeeze. She thought about her own dream, the one she had hidden away like an old photograph. She used to imagine herself on a stage, playing something so beautiful it made people stop breathing for a moment. But she pushed the thought aside. That was another life, one she could never afford to live. The night went on smoothly until the unexpected happened. The restaurant pianist, who was supposed to play soft background music, called to say he was stuck in traffic. The manager frowned, glancing at the group of judges waiting for their dinner. "Well, that's just great," he muttered. "They'll be sitting here in silence." Lila hesitated before saying, "I could play something if you'd like." Her manager blinked. "You?" She nodded quietly. "Just until he arrives. I remember a few pieces." Before he could reply, one of the judges overheard. Mr. Coleman looked up from his glass and said, half amused, "The waitress plays piano?" There was a light chuckle from the table. "She does," the manager said with a shrug. "Pretty good, actually." Mr. Coleman leaned back in his chair, clearly entertained. "Well, why not?" Let's hear it. Play us something, miss. We could use a little music. Lila froze. She hadn't expected him to take it seriously. Her hands felt cold, and for a moment she wished she hadn't spoken up. But then she saw the look in his eyes, not cruel, just doubtful. Like he didn't believe she could do it, and somehow that gave her courage. She nodded slightly and walked toward the piano in the corner. It looked smaller than she remembered, its wooden surface catching the glow of the candles. The chatter in the diner faded as everyone turned to watch. Even the sound of the kitchen seemed to quiet down. Lila took a slow breath, placed her fingers on the keys, and closed her eyes. At first she played softly, unsure if she even remembered the notes. Her fingers trembled and she could hear her own heartbeat louder than the music. But then, something changed. The familiar rhythm came back, flowing through her hands like water finding its way home. She began to lose herself in the sound, the gentle rise and fall of the melody, the emotion hiding in every chord. The tune was something she had written years ago, back when she still dreamed of performing. It was simple but full of feeling, like a story told without words. The room grew completely silent. The judges stopped eating. Even the waitstaff stood still, their eyes fixed on her. There was no hesitation now. Her hands moved gracefully, confidently. Every note seemed to carry a memory of long nights spent, practicing, of tears shed when she thought her dream was over, of the quiet strength it took to keep going. By the time she reached the final note, her heart was pounding and her eyes were wet. She let her hands rest on the keys for a moment before she looked up. The diner was quiet for half a second, and then the sound of applause filled the air. People were clapping, customers, waiters, even the cooks peeking from the kitchen door. Lila stood up quickly, embarrassed but smiling. She didn't know what to do with so many eyes on her. She gave a small nod and stepped back from the piano. Mr. Coleman was still sitting in his chair, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he began to clap too. "That," he said finally, "was not what I expected." His voice carried across the room, and everyone turned to look at him. Lila felt her face grow warm. "I didn't mean to interrupt your dinner," she said softly. He shook his head. "You didn't interrupt it, you changed it." She didn't know how to respond. Her manager patted her shoulder proudly, whispering, "I told you, you were good." Lila smiled shyly and went back to serving tables, pretending like nothing had happened. But inside, her heart felt lighter than it had in years. Later that night, when the crowd thinned and the judges prepared to leave, Mr. Coleman stopped by the counter. "You said you never studied music formally?" he asked. "No, sir, I couldn't afford it," she replied quietly. He looked at her for a long moment. "That's a shame," he said. "You have something rare." Lila didn't know what to say. She just thanked him and watched as he left with the others. When the restaurant finally closed and the lights dimmed, she sat down again at the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys and she smiled to herself. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like just a waitress. That night, as the moonlight touched the empty tables, she played once more. This time not for anyone else, but for herself. She didn't know it yet, but that small moment would change everything. That night, after everyone left, the restaurant felt quiet in a way Lila had never felt before. She stayed a few extra minutes sitting near the piano, tracing her fingers along the edge of the keys. The room still seemed to carry the echoes of her music. It was strange. Earlier that evening she had felt invisible, but after playing, she felt seen for the first time in years. When she finally walked home, the air was cool, and the streetlights flickered along the road. The little town was asleep, and she liked it that way. Every step she took home felt lighter than the one before. A small part of her kept replaying what the judge, Mr. Coleman, had said before leaving. "You have something rare." Those words kept circling in her head all night. She didn't know exactly what he meant, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual. The sunlight was soft through her window, and for once she didn't feel the usual rush to get ready for work. Instead, she sat by her small keyboard, a cheap one she had bought years ago at a second-hand store, and began to play quietly. Her fingers stumbled at first, but soon they found their rhythm. Her younger brother peeked into the room, rubbing his eyes. "You're playing again?" he asked with a sleepy smile. "Yeah," she said softly, smiling back. "Just for a little while." He nodded and went back to bed. He didn't know what had happened at the diner the night before, and she didn't tell him yet. It felt too precious to explain. When she arrived at work, the place was buzzing more than usual. The cook called out, "Hey, superstar! You made quite a show last night." Lila blushed and laughed it off. "Don't start," she said. "I mean it," he continued. "Everyone's been talking about it." The manager said even those talent judges couldn't believe it. "You really surprised them." She tried to keep her composure, but deep down a small wave of pride warmed her chest. Around noon, the restaurant phone rang. The manager picked it up, talked for a moment, then looked over at Lila with raised eyebrows. "It's for you," he said, handing her the receiver. She took it, confused. "Hello?" A calm, familiar voice answered. "Lila, this is Mr. Coleman. You probably remember me from last night." Her heart jumped. "Yes, sir. I remember. I hope I'm not interrupting your work," he said politely. "I wanted to talk to you about something." She stood still, her hand tightening around the phone. "Of course. I'm one of the judges for the state music competition happening this week," he said. "We're holding open auditions again tomorrow. After hearing you play last night, I believe you should come." Lila froze. "Me, but I work here. I'm not really a performer. You are," he said firmly. "You just don't see it yet. You have real talent, and you shouldn't hide it. If you come, I'll make sure you get a fair chance." She didn't know what to say. Her mind was spinning. She had dreamed of something like this for so long, but now that it was right in front of her, she was scared. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll think about it." "Good," he replied. "I'll be there. I hope you will too." Then he hung up. Lila stood there, the phone still pressed to her ear. The manager looked at her curiously. "Everything okay?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think so." All day she couldn't focus. As she served tables and refilled coffee, her thoughts kept returning to the phone call. Could she really do it? She hadn't performed in front of a real audience in years. What if she made a fool of herself? What if she wasn't as good as he thought? That night after closing, she stayed behind again. The restaurant was empty, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the flickering neon sign outside. She sat at the piano, staring at the keys. Her hands hovered above them, but she didn't play. Not yet. She was scared to try because if she played and it didn't sound right, then maybe she'd have to admit that her chance was gone. Then she remembered something her grandmother used to tell her when she was little. Don't wait for perfect moments. Make the moment perfect with what you have. She smiled at the memory and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The sound filled the empty room again, soft and warm. Her fingers moved slowly at first, then faster as her confidence grew. She lost track of time. It was just her, the piano, and the music that had always lived in her heart. When she finished, she felt tears on her cheeks. But they weren't from sadness. They were from a deep sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The next morning, she made her decision. She told her manager she needed the day off. "You going to that audition?" he asked with a knowing smile. She nodded nervously. "I think I have to," he grinned. "Good, you deserve it. Go show them what you can do." The bus ride to the city felt long. She sat by the window watching the trees and buildings blur past. Her hands were sweating and her stomach fluttered with nerves. She kept reminding herself that this was just another chance to play, just music like she always did. But deep down she knew it was much more than that. When she arrived at the venue, the place was packed with people, singers, dancers, musicians, all waiting for their turn. Some looked confident, others terrified. Everyone seemed to belong there except her. She signed her name on the registration sheet. When the lady behind the desk asked, "Instrument?" she hesitated before saying, "Piano. Professional or self-taught?" "Self-taught," the woman smiled kindly. "Good luck, dear." As Lila waited backstage, she could hear the faint sound of performances from the main hall. Some good, some not so good. The crowd murmured, judges whispered, and every few minutes someone left either smiling or on the verge of tears. When her name was finally called, her heart raced. She walked to the stage slowly, her steps echoing in the large hall. The lights were bright and the room seemed endless. She could see the judge's table at the front. Mr. Coleman was there, sitting with two others. He gave her a small nod as if to say, "You can do this." She sat at the piano, hands trembling slightly. She took a deep breath and remembered the restaurant, the smell of coffee, the soft clinking of dishes, the quiet hum of conversation. She imagined she was back there playing for herself, not for judges or prizes. Then she began. The first notes were gentle, hesitant. But soon the melody flowed naturally, each key connecting to the next like a story unfolding. The piece she chose was her own composition, the same one she played that night at the diner. The judges leaned forward as the music filled the hall. It wasn't flashy or complicated, but it was honest. Every note carried a piece of her life, the struggles, the late nights, the unspoken dreams. By the time she reached the final chord, the room was silent. For a moment, no one moved. Then came a soft murmur of surprise from the audience. Mr. Coleman broke into a slow, steady clap. The others followed. When she stood up, she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The audience was standing. People were clapping for her, the waitress who thought she'd never play again. Mr. Coleman leaned forward and said into the microphone, "What's your name again?" "Lila," she replied softly. "Well, Lila," he said, smiling, "I think you've just reminded us what real music sounds like." She felt her chest tighten with emotion. She wanted to cry but instead smiled, her hands still shaking. When she stepped off the stage, people were whispering her name. A few contestants even congratulated her. One young man said, "I've never heard anything like that." "You played from the heart." She didn't know how to respond except with a quiet, "Thank you." As she left the building, she felt like she was walking on air. The world outside looked brighter somehow. The noise of the city, the rush of people, it all felt new. She didn't know what would happen next or if she would win the competition, but in that moment it didn't matter. For the first time in a long while, she believed in herself again, and somewhere deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The next few days after the audition felt unreal for Lila. Every time she walked into the restaurant, people looked at her differently. The same regulars who once called her kiddo or coffee girl now asked, "So how did the competition go?" She would smile politely and say, "It went well," though deep down she still couldn't believe it herself. Her performance video had gone viral locally. Someone from the audience had recorded it and uploaded it online. The clip was simple. A young woman sitting at a piano, eyes closed, pouring her heart into every note. The comments were full of words like beautiful, pure talent, and she deserves a chance. Even the restaurant manager couldn't stop talking about it. "Lila," he said one afternoon holding his phone, "you're famous now. Look at this, 50,000 views. People love you." She blushed, embarrassed. "Please don't make a big deal out of it," she said softly. It's just one performance, but she knew it wasn't just one performance. It had changed everything. 2 days later, she received a call from the competition committee. They told her she had been selected for the next round. This one wouldn't be just an audition. It would be a televised performance, broadcast live from the city theater. When she hung up the phone, she just stood there for a moment, speechless. Her heart raced so fast she could hardly breathe. Her brother looked at her curiously. "What happened?" She smiled and said quietly, "I made it to the next round." He jumped up, grinning. "You did? That's amazing." She laughed, half in disbelief, half in joy. It was the first time she had allowed herself to feel excited. For so long she had kept her dreams hidden, afraid they might break. Now, for the first time, it felt like they were coming to life. That night, she sat again at the restaurant piano after closing hours. The place was quiet, just the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the glow of the streetlight through the window. She placed her fingers on the keys, trying to think of what to play for the next round. She knew this one had to be different. The judges had already seen her emotional side. Now she needed to show her skill, her range, her creativity. But she didn't have a teacher, no one to guide her. All she had was her ear, her heart, and her old keyboard at home. She practiced every spare moment she had. Before work, after work, during lunch breaks, whenever she could steal a few minutes, she played. Sometimes she got lost in the sound until her fingers ached. But she didn't complain. The night before the next performance, she barely slept. She kept imagining what the stage would look like, what the judges might say, what the audience would think. The next morning, she took the early bus to the city, clutching her small music notebook in her hands. The theater was grander than she had imagined. Tall ceilings, bright lights, and people everywhere. Contestants tuned their instruments, stretched, and whispered nervously to one another. When she stepped inside, she spotted Mr. Coleman near the judges' area. He noticed her too and smiled warmly. "I'm glad you came back," he said. "I almost didn't," she admitted with a shy laugh. "It's a little scary," he nodded. "That's how you know it matters." Those words calmed her somehow. She sat backstage waiting for her turn, listening to others perform. Some were brilliant, others struggled. The crowd clapped politely each time, but the energy in the room felt tense. Finally, a stage assistant came over and said, "You're up next." Her hands felt cold, her heart thudding in her chest. As she walked toward the piano on stage, the bright lights hit her face, making it hard to see the audience. She could just make out the judges' table and the faint outline of Mr. Coleman watching her closely. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. The piece she chose was one she had written herself the week before, a mix of soft emotion and sudden bursts of energy, like the story of her own life in music. The melody began gently, almost hesitant, then grew louder, stronger, braver. Each note carried the struggles she had faced, the long nights at the restaurant, the years of hiding her gift. Halfway through, something unexpected happened. The power of the music seemed to fill her completely. Her fear melted away. She forgot she was in a competition. She wasn't playing for the judges anymore, she was playing for herself. When the final chord rang out, there was a moment of silence. Then the crowd erupted in applause. Lila looked up, tears in her eyes. She saw Mr. Coleman nodding slowly, a proud smile on his face. Afterward, as she walked off stage, the host stopped her for a quick interview. "That was stunning," he said. "Can you tell us what inspired that piece?" She hesitated, then said softly, "I just wanted to tell my story through the piano. I guess this is my way of saying that even if life doesn't go how you planned, you can still find your music again." The audience clapped again. That evening, when the results were announced, Lila made it through to the semifinals. The crowd cheered her name. Reporters wanted to talk to her, and people online began sharing her story, the waitress who amazed the judges. Back home, her family watched the replay on TV. Her brother couldn't stop smiling. "That's my sister," he said proudly. Her manager called her later that night. "Lila, you have no idea what's happening. People are coming to the restaurant asking for you. They want to see the waitress who plays piano." She laughed softly. "Well, tell them I'll still be there tomorrow morning making coffee." Even with the sudden attention, Lila stayed humble. She didn't see herself as a celebrity. She still woke up early, helped at home, and worked her shifts. But now every time she looked at the piano, she saw possibility instead of regret. A few days later, she received another call, this time from a music school in the city. A woman on the line said they had seen her performance and wanted to offer her a scholarship for formal training. Lila's eyes widened. "A scholarship? But I never applied." "We know," the woman said kindly. "One of our board members saw your performance and thought you deserved a chance. You have real talent, and with a little guidance, you could go very far." After the call, Lila sat quietly for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. For years, she had thought her chance was gone forever. Now suddenly, doors she had only dreamed of were opening, but with opportunity came fear. The semifinals were approaching, and this time, the competition would be fierce. She began to doubt herself again. She wondered if she really belonged there among trained musicians who had studied for years. Mr. Coleman must have sensed her uncertainty, because one afternoon he visited the restaurant. She was wiping tables when she saw him walk in, dressed neatly as always. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. She nodded, smiling. "Of course," he looked around the diner, then at her. "Still working here?" "Of course," she said. "This place keeps me grounded," he chuckled. "I can see that." Then his tone softened. "You know, Lila, talent like yours doesn't come around often. I've been judging for 20 years, and very few people make me feel something the way you do when you play. You have a gift, but you have to believe in it too." She looked down, unsure how to respond. "It's just hard sometimes," she admitted. "I never thought I'd get this far. I'm scared to lose it." He nodded gently. "That fear is natural. But don't let it stop you. Let it push you. Those words stayed with her. That night she practiced until her fingers hurt, refusing to give in to doubt. When the day of the semifinals arrived, she walked on stage with her heart steady. She wasn't the same timid waitress anymore. She was an artist now, still humble, still simple but stronger. The lights dimmed, the crowd hushed, and once again, her fingers began to dance across the keys, and as the melody rose, the judges exchanged glances. There was something about her that was different, not just skill but emotion. Every note told a story, and everyone in that theater felt it. When the last note faded, there was silence again. Then thunderous applause. Mr. Coleman stood up this time, clapping with genuine pride. The other judges followed, and as Lila stood there bowing shyly, she realized something. This wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about proving to herself that the girl who once thought her dream was over still had the courage to chase it. The day after the semifinals, Lila woke up feeling both thrilled and nervous. The applause from the night before still echoed in her mind. She couldn't believe she had made it this far. What started as a small, quiet life in a diner had now turned into something much bigger than she ever imagined. But as the competition grew, so did the pressure. Her face was now being shared online, her story written in blogs and newspapers. Some called her the waitress with golden hands. Others doubted her, saying she had just gotten lucky. At first, she tried not to read the comments, but one night curiosity got the better of her. She scrolled through posts on her phone. Some were full of love and encouragement, but others weren't so kind. "She's not that good," one comment said. "There are real musicians who deserve it more." "Sympathy votes," another wrote. "People like her just get attention because of her sad story." Lila turned off her phone, her heart sinking. For the first time in weeks, she felt small again. The next morning, she arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual. She needed to feel normal again, to be surrounded by something steady. The familiar smell of coffee and breakfast helped calm her. Her manager noticed she was quieter than usual. "You okay, kid?" he asked. She forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." He didn't push her. He knew she wasn't one to complain. Later that afternoon, while she was cleaning a table, the door opened and Mr. Coleman walked in. He smiled as soon as he saw her. "I had a feeling I'd find you here," he said. She laughed softly. "This place is like my second home." He nodded, looking around. "It suits you. But soon you might be spending more time on stages than in diners." "I don't know about that," she said, half joking. He sat down at his usual spot and said quietly, "I saw some of the things people are saying online." Lila froze. "Oh, you saw that?" He nodded. "People talk, Lila, they always do. But none of them were in that room. They didn't feel what we all felt when you played." His tone was gentle but firm. "Don't let noise drown out your music." Those words sank deep into her heart. She smiled faintly. "I'll try not to." He leaned forward slightly. "You've come a long way, but this next round will be the hardest. The finals attract the best musicians from across the country. Everyone will be watching." "I know," she said softly. "That's what scares me." He smiled. "Good. That means you care." For the next 2 weeks, Lila practiced harder than ever. She barely had time to rest. She worked her shifts at the restaurant during the day, then stayed up late practicing at home. Her fingers sometimes hurt from playing too much, but she didn't stop. Her brother would peek into her room sometimes and say, "You should rest." "I can't," she'd reply with a tired smile. The finals are soon. Despite her exhaustion, she felt alive. Each time she played, she could feel herself growing, her sound richer, her touch stronger. The night before the finals, she sat quietly by her window, staring at the sky. The city lights shimmered in the distance. She whispered to herself, "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'll give it everything." The next morning came quickly. The theater was packed. Cameras, journalists, bright lights. It felt different from every round before. The audience buzzed with excitement. Backstage, Lila could hear the muffled sound of other contestants performing. Some played powerful classical pieces. Others showed off dazzling speed and skill. She listened and felt her stomach twist with nerves. "What if I'm not good enough?" she thought. Then she remembered Mr. Coleman's words. "Don't let noise drown out your music." When her name was called, she walked out slowly, her heart racing. The spotlight hit her face and the crowd quieted. She could see the judges sitting in front. their expressions serious but kind. Mr. Coleman gave her a small nod of encouragement. She sat at the piano and took a deep breath. She had chosen a piece that was deeply personal, something she wrote after her father's passing. It was full of emotion, quiet strength, and moments of aching beauty. She started to play. At first, her hands trembled, but as the melody unfolded, she lost herself in it. The music rose and fell like a story, her story. Every key seemed to carry a piece of her heart, every pause filled with meaning. The theater grew completely silent. The audience leaned in, hanging on every note. Halfway through, her eyes welled up with tears, but she didn't stop. She played through the emotion, letting it flow into the sound. It wasn't just skill they were hearing, it was honesty. It was life. When she hit the final note, it lingered in the air for what felt like forever. Then the audience erupted in applause, louder and longer than before. Lila sat there, overwhelmed, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. Mr. Coleman stood up. One by one, the other judges followed. The crowd rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even wiping their eyes. Lila bowed her head, unable to hold back her tears anymore. When she walked off stage, the backstage crew congratulated her. Some hugged her, others just smiled, moved by what they'd heard. Mr. Coleman met her near the curtain. "You did it," he said softly. She looked up at him, her voice trembling. "Thank you for believing in me." "I didn't just believe in you," he replied. "You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place." Those words hit her deeply. The results were announced later that night. The tension in the theater was heavy. The host read through the names one by one, building suspense. Finally, he said it, and the winner of this year's national piano competition is Lila. The audience cheered, the lights flashed, and Lila froze in disbelief. Her hands flew to her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she walked to the stage to receive her award. She looked at the shining trophy, barely able to believe it was real. As she turned to face the crowd, she caught sight of Mr. Coleman smiling proudly. When the noise settled, the host handed her the microphone. "Lila, the world wants to know how it feels to go from a small-town waitress to a national champion." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "It feels unreal," she said softly. "I never imagined this would happen. I almost gave up on my dream because life got hard, but music never left me. It was always there, waiting. I'm just grateful I found the courage to play again." The audience applauded warmly. That night after the celebration, she walked outside the theater alone. The air was cool and the street was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. She sat on a bench holding the trophy in her hands and let out a long breath. She thought about the years she spent working at the diner, about the tired mornings and the quiet evenings when she thought no one was watching. She thought about her father, her family, her brother cheering her on. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they were happy tears. As she sat there lost in thought, Mr. Coleman walked out of the theater and spotted her. He approached quietly and sat beside her. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked gently. She smiled. "Too much noise in my head. I keep thinking this is a dream," he chuckled. "Dreams are meant to be chased." "You did that." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the night sky. "You know," he said finally, "when I first saw you at that restaurant, I didn't expect anything special. I was wrong. You reminded me that real talent doesn't always come from fancy schools or big cities. Sometimes it's hidden in small places waiting to be heard." Lila smiled softly. "Thank you for giving me a chance," he shook his head. "No, Lila, you earned it." They both looked ahead, the city lights shimmering before them. For a long moment, neither spoke. It was enough just to sit there, knowing something extraordinary had happened. When she finally went home that night, she placed the trophy on her small table and looked around her room. The same walls, the same old keyboard, the same life, but everything felt different now, because now she knew what she was capable of. And though her journey had started in a small diner, serving coffee to strangers, it had led her somewhere beautiful, back to herself. After the competition, everything in Lila's life started to change faster than she could process. In just a few weeks, she went from serving coffee to signing contracts. Journalists wanted interviews. TV shows wanted her story. People online who once doubted her were now calling her an inspiration. But fame didn't feel the way she expected. It was exciting, yes, but also strange. She still lived in her small apartment, still woke up to the same view, still made her morning coffee the same way. Only now her phone wouldn't stop ringing. One morning, she sat at her kitchen table staring at the emails piling up on her screen. Invitations from music schools, concert halls, even a record label. It all felt overwhelming. Her brother walked in, half asleep, rubbing his eyes. "You look like you're studying for an exam," he said. She smiled faintly. "It kind of feels like that." He glanced at her screen. "You don't have to say yes to everything, you know." "I know," she said softly. "But what if this chance never comes again?" He looked at her for a moment and said, "If it's meant for you, it won't disappear just because you rest for a while." Those words stayed with her. That evening, instead of practicing or replying to emails, she went back to the diner. It felt strange walking in, not as an employee but as a guest. The same faces turned toward her, this time smiling wider than ever. "Look who it is," her manager shouted from behind the counter. "Our star pianist." The customers clapped and laughed. Lila blushed and waved shyly. She sat at her old corner table where she used to write her thoughts between shifts. Her manager brought her a cup of coffee, just like old times. "You haven't changed a bit," he said, shaking his head. She laughed softly. "I don't think I ever will." He leaned on the counter and said, "I watched your performance on TV. You made us proud, kid. But I hope you don't forget where you started." "I could never forget," she replied. "This place gave me strength when I had none." They talked for a while, and by the time she left, she felt lighter. Fame had its noise, but here, in this little diner, life still felt quiet, real, and familiar. The next few months were busy. Lila traveled to different cities, performing in small concerts and charity events. She didn't ask for big money or luxury. She just wanted to play and share what music meant to her. At one concert after her performance, a little girl came up to her with wide eyes. "I want to play piano like you someday," she said softly. Lila knelt down and smiled. "Then you will. Just promise me one thing. Never stop playing even when life gets hard." The girl nodded, her eyes shining. Moments like that became Lila's favorite part of her new life. It reminded her why she started, not for fame or money, but for connection, for the feeling that music could reach people's hearts the way it reached hers. But despite her growing success, there were still lonely nights, some evenings. After long days of traveling and performing, she'd come home to her quiet apartment. The lights from the city glowed through her window. She'd sit by her piano and play softly, not for an audience this time, just for herself. Sometimes she'd look at her trophy on the shelf and smile, not because of what it represented, but because of the journey behind it. Every late night, every doubt, every step that led her here. One night, she received a call from Mr. Coleman. "I have a proposal," he said. "There's a small music school in the countryside that's struggling. They can't afford big teachers, but the students there are talented. I think you could help them." Lila paused. "You want me to teach?" "Yes," he said warmly. "Just for a few weeks. Share what you've learned. It could mean the world to them." She thought for a moment, then smiled. "I'd love to." The next month, she packed her bags and traveled to the quiet little town. The school was old but full of character. Cracked walls, creaky floors, and a small piano that had clearly seen better days. The students were shy at first. Most of them had never met anyone famous before. But Lila didn't act like a celebrity. She spoke to them gently, laughed with them, and reminded them that music wasn't about being perfect. "It's about feeling," she told them. "If you can make someone feel something when you play, then you're already a great musician." Day by day, the students grew more confident. Their hands moved more freely, their smiles brighter after each lesson. One boy who had trouble with stage fright asked her, "Weren't you scared when you played for all those judges?" She laughed. "I was terrified. But I realized something. Fear and excitement feel almost the same. I just decided to call it excitement." He nodded slowly, understanding more than words could say. By the end of her time there, the school held a small recital. The students performed beautifully, their faces glowing with pride. Lila sat in the back, clapping for each one. When it was over, the headmaster thanked her. "You've given them more than music," he said. "You've given them belief." That night, as she walked back to her guest room, Lila looked up at the sky. The stars were bright and clear. She realized something. This was what truly mattered. Not fame, not trophies, not headlines. It was about touching lives just as others had touched hers. When she returned to the city, she decided to slow down her schedule. She wanted balance. Time to create, time to rest, time to give back. She started a small foundation that offered free music lessons to children who couldn't afford them. She donated instruments, arranged workshops, and invited local musicians to volunteer. At the first open session, the room was filled with kids, some shy, some curious, all eager to learn. Lila stood in front of them and said with a smile, "I was once just like you. I didn't have much, but I had a dream. And sometimes that's enough." The children listened wide-eyed. As months passed, her foundation grew. People began supporting her cause. What started as a single dream became a ripple, spreading hope to others who once felt unseen. One afternoon, as she was leaving the practice hall, she saw Mr. Coleman waiting outside. His face carried a proud smile. "You've built something beautiful here," he said. "I just wanted to give back," she replied softly. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I want to do the same for others," he nodded, his eyes warm. And that's the true mark of an artist. Not how loud their applause is, but how deeply they move others. That evening, Lila walked back into her apartment. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She sat at her piano and began to play a new melody. Gentle, uplifting, full of gratitude. As the notes filled the room, memories flashed through her mind. The diner, the late nights, the fear, the triumph. She smiled through the tears that filled her eyes. When she finished playing, she closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." The sound of her own voice felt like a quiet promise to keep going, to keep giving, to never forget who she was before all of this began. In the years that followed, Lila's name became known around the world, but she never lost her humility. She continued to teach, perform, and help others find their own voices. Whenever people asked her what success meant, she always said, "It's not about being seen. It's about what you leave behind when no one's watching." And sometimes when she visited her hometown, she'd stop by the diner. The same old tables, the same old smell of coffee. Her manager, older now but still cheerful, would greet her with the same words, "Our star pianist is back." She'd laugh, sit in her old corner, and think about how everything started from there. A girl wiping tables, humming songs no one heard yet, because that was the truth she carried all her life. Greatness doesn't always begin in grand places. Sometimes it starts quietly, in small rooms, under dim lights, in hearts that refuse to give up. And through every stage she played on, every crowd she faced, that truth followed her like a melody that never faded, reminding her that the waitress who once dreamed by the piano had become something far greater than famous. She had become whole.